going and see who's there.
Okay, so we are now broadcasting / recording. Oh, there's Amy. Oh, there's Jane. Okay. And Amy. I don't see Suzanne. Oh, there's Sean. Oops. Oh, there's Suzanne.
Okay, Amy. We've got all our board members here, and we have Judy Barrett, also Amy Questle. Good to see you. And I'll just open up the meeting. Good evening. Today is Monday, November 2nd. It is 7 o'clock, and we have a hearing this evening, case number 0320 55 SS LLC. This is the Summer Street Comprehensive Permit 40B project for construction of 240 rental units and 60 ownership units. And the topics for tonight is to have the peer reviewers comment, and we're going to go over those. Obviously, it's a public hearing. Public is welcome, but the night for the public hearing, the neighbors' comments is going to be on Thursday of this week. So good to see everybody there. And I still see we have about 35 participants, so that's great. And with us tonight, I should introduce the board. We have member Drew Delaney, member Dave Anderson, Bob Fitzgerald, the clerk, Ashley Clark, the economic development representative, Judy Barrett, who's the 40B consultant working for the town, Amy Messier, the administrative secretary for the board, member Jane Coffey, town council, Amy Questle, Suzanne Murphy, vice chair, and I see we have Sean Reardon with us, peer reviewer. So we have all the key people here. So let's go ahead. Mr. Hale, good evening.
Good evening. Hope you're all well. So tonight I have with us, with me, a team of people, Katie Enright and Patrick Bogle from Howard Stein Hudson, Brent Mogul and Jeremy Baldwin from Mogul Architects, Lou Levine representing us on 40B matters, Phil Mackey may join later, and Ken Cram from Bayside Engineering, who will talk about traffic. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Enright to start a presentation of the recent changes in the project.
Just before we do that, because we have town council here, I'm gonna, Amy, is there anything that we should be doing at the start of this meeting?
No, provided that you're following your schedule that you had set out.
Yep.
Yep.
No, we're good. Okay.
And I just had one thing, Ashley, if you could let Rob Woodland in, or from Sean Reardon.
He should be showing. Yep,
Thanks.
there. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Katie Enright, go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Katie Enright with Howard Stein Hudson. I'm an associate principal and project engineer with Howard Stein Hudson in our Chelmsford office. I'm here tonight just to go over some plan changes since the last time we were able to present a plan. And I believe if Leslie is allowed to share her screen, that will help us kind of move through the process quicker. Let's give a second for Leslie to come up, but I can certainly start. Some of the slides we put together for you tonight kind of explain kind of the story of where we've come and the new plan that's before you that we produced in October. Most of the plan changes, there we go, have to do with reducing the environmental footprint and really working continuously with the Conservation Commission to come up with a better project, a project that's more environmentally sensitive. And Leslie, if you can move to the next slide. These are just some of the highlights, but I'm going to point them out on the next plan. But we're really looking to reduce the environmental footprint. We've completely now moved the project out of the riverfront area, so we're more than 200 feet from the river. We've reduced the number of multifamily buildings, and you'll see this in the new concept plan from 4 to 2, which reduces the building impact. We've increased distance between buildings, which was something that Cliff Bomer with Davis Square Architects had brought up at your last hearing, to make it feel like there's additional space between the buildings and also additional amenity space and space between the clubhouse. We've increased and laid out the amenity area. We've improved internal circulation. We've increased our multifamily buildings to 6 floors, and you'll see what that does is it significantly reduces our building impact as far as the footprint itself, and it also allows us, again, with 6 floors, we're very significantly at the back of the project site with the multifamily buildings, which you'll also see in our renderings. We've also taken 14 single family homes and created 7 duplexes. So we're not adding units there, we're taking 2 houses and putting them together. And what that does is it again reduces the building footprint and opens up additional site open space between buildings. We've also adjusted road C and D, the internal driveways, to get a greater distance apart. That was one of Tetra Tech's comments, to get over 100 feet between those 2 driveways. We're now at about 116. And we've changed the product mix very, very slightly. We're still at 300 total, but what we've done is we still have 192 apartments, but we've moved 4 units from the single family residential for sale area to the townhome units. So we now have 52 townhomes and 56 houses on the ownership side. Leslie, if you can go to the next slide, it'll help kind of better describe what we've done. And I'm just going to move through this very quickly. As you come into the project site, most of that pretty much remains the same until you get to roadway B, the first kind of offshoot where there's 12 townhomes off to the side. Roadway B, what we've done is we've reduced the impact to the vernal pool in that area by moving the pond more than 100 feet away from that vernal pool. You come into the site and take a right and move through the site there. As you come up to the area right before you jump into the multifamily 6-floor buildings, there used to be a roadway there called roadway D between vernal pools 1 and 2. And we've reduced that. We've taken that little dead-ended area away from the project site and added an additional 4 units in there that we took away from the for sale units. As you move into the back area, the multifamily area, you can see there's significantly more open space than we had previously, and the buildings are spaced pretty significantly apart based on the previous plan. So now we are seeing more than, I believe it's 240 units between the 240 linear feet between the buildings. The L-shaped building is 152 feet from the clubhouse, and the straight building is 143 feet from the clubhouse. And we now, including the clubhouse and the open space area, have about 38,500 square feet in that center area. So it's just under an acre in that center area. And you can see there's a sidewalk that wraps all the way around there. So the view sheds have changed pretty significantly along with the internal circulation in that area. We've also been able to, with the new building configuration, put more parking spaces underground. So that again reduces the pervious or the impervious footprint of the project site. We're about 20 spaces less at the surface than we were in the previous iteration. And as you come through the multifamily kind of over to the single family area, we've moved all of these ponds outside of the 200-foot riverfront area. This little area here in between the single family duplex area and the multifamily is still one way going towards the east. And that's really just in here for bus circulation and also fire circulation.
Bus.
Lives on this side will not go through the multifamily area. Really, they'll go back out to the main road via roadway D. You can see kind of scattered throughout roadway D, there's a few duplexes. There's 3 duplexes here on roadway D. What that's done is it allows us to have a little bit more space between the units and give a little bit more space to the river. And then as you come back to roadway A and wrap out to roadway E, we've also added a few additional duplexes here. So we've taken 8 units on this road and made them into 4, essentially 4 buildings. It's still 8 units. What that's done is that it's allowed us to shorten that cul-de-sac road pretty significantly. And again, move this proposed infiltration area exterior of the 200-foot riverfront area. So all really important changes as we work through the Conservation Commission's comments and questions and the peer reviews we've seen there. We feel we've made a lot of really good overall adjustments to the plans. As you move to the next picture, Leslie. This just is a breakdown of the unit mix. So as I stated before, we've moved 4 units from ownership to the rental townhomes, but we're still at that 300 number. And what we've done is we've introduced 6 studio apartments into the multifamily area. Still 192 apartments. We've just changed the mix slightly to offer a little bit more of a variety in the overall multifamily. So it brings you through the number of 1s, the number of 2s in both the multifamily, the 2s and the 3s in the rental townhomes. And then again, the ownership units, we have them separated now into 2-bedroom standalone, 3-bedroom standalone, and then a 2-bedroom duplex and a 3-bedroom duplex. And then if you move to the next slide, I know it was requested and we had provided some of these before, but we've updated them as the project updates, an aerial view of what our project would look like. So you can see in this picture, you can see the new unit types that we have here, and it shows the 6-story buildings and the orientation of the 6-story buildings. So you can see as you come into the site, there are the first 5 single-family units on the left, the Boulevard roadway as you come in, then roadway B with the townhomes off to the right. And then you come up onto roadway C, where you start to wrap around through the townhome units. You can see the trees and the areas of the wetlands and the vernal pools and the open space and green space adjacent to these units. As you wrap back around to the multifamily, you can see the changes in orientation have really opened up that area to different view sheds. So you're seeing essentially one face of the short side of the L facing come in up over the green space and the clubhouse. The second side of the L is essentially hidden from view from that viewpoint. And then the linear building on the left. Then as you move your way back through the single families and duplex units, you can again see the wooded areas between those units and around protecting the river on the north side of the project. And then again, coming down into the cul-de-sac area, you can see that the buildings now are located interior of the cul-de-sac essentially, and then on the exterior of the cul-de-sac is green space and the infiltration pond on that area. So you can see a good view shed of the whole 50 some odd acres and how the 300 units sit therein. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brent Mogul from Mogul Architects, who created this image, and talk to you a little bit about the new units that you're seeing today. So with that, I believe, Brent, are you on? I see him, he's there, he's just not unmuted yet. Brent, are you able to speak?
How's that?
Oh, there he is. All
Very
right,
good.
thank you very much. Here's Brent.
And it's appropriate you can't see me. Nothing to look at here. We'll try that video. All right, so thank you, Katie. Well done. I'm going to be very brief about this, but first of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you for, and the board, thank you for hearing about our proposal this evening. And I also want to thank Cliff Boomer for suggestions he made some 2 or 3 months ago. I think it was in August, where he issued his observations about possible improvements to the site. And his comments have been really instrumental to some of the changes Katie just spoke to. And I think we've made some vast improvements in that regard. One of the improvements came about the increase in open space as a result of a decrease in building footprint came from the introduction of duplex units. So Leslie, if you can show that slide. So a number of opportunities we have to increase the green area and decrease the coverage resulted from taking 2 single units and joining them together as a duplex. There are some that are 2-bedroom configurations, like the small intimate image you see at the top, and then some 3-bedroom units that are taller in massing, but still very much consistent with what the single family neighborhood will look like for the individual homes. And then the real change in the site, if we can go to the next slide, is the open space that Katie spoke about is a direct result of going to 6-story buildings so that we can combine 2 into 1, and that we can dramatically decrease the amount of coverage on the ground plane. So the image you see here is of the clubhouse in its new location with the almost acre green space around it. One of Cliff's comments was that the clubhouse and the pool facility did not have an outdoor amenity space. So we've been able to answer that query and successfully so. And this is just an image of how the building that is the tallest building at the back of the site is appropriate, given that that part of the site is about 20 feet below the entry road into the site. So it's really only going to be about 40 feet above the entry road. And as you know, there's an abundance of mature vegetation there, trees ranging from 40 to 60 feet. So this gives you a little flavor of what the environment will be around the new configuration, which is obvious that there's a dramatically more open space provided in this design. And then one of Cliff's comments was that he thought we could be a little more pedestrian friendly and improve the vehicular circulation around the site. And this added nearly an acre of green spaces, afforded us to do that with properly located sidewalks and also a reduced pavement area for the driving areas. So we're very happy about how this is turning out with Cliff's comments and our response to them. The architecture, we've been in business for 30 years doing this for that amount of time, and we've worked with many multifamily communities where this site in particular is encouraging to us because it has so much undisturbed mature vegetation that will be remaining on the site. It's very, very appropriately separated from the grid of the neighborhoods, and the majority of the housing is tucked to the back of the site, which is not particularly visible from the public ways. So this site has a lot of things going for it. We know that the architecture will be exemplary. We will be using Energy Star appliances and exceeding the energy codes set by the state standards, and just very excited about the improvements that have made since our first submission. So to speak somewhat to the vehicular improvements, we have Ken Graham from Bay State to continue on and answering questions about vehicular circulation or traffic. So thank you for your time.
Good evening, board members. Excuse me. My name is Ken Cram. I'm a registered professional traffic engineer with Bayside Engineering. Just started my 10th year here, but have been preparing traffic impact and access studies, intersection design, signal design, for well over 35 years now. Done a number of projects in Walpole in the past, smaller projects, nothing too recent, but have done work down in that area. Excuse me. Bayside is a small civil engineering firm. We do highway design, many projects for Mass DOT, as well as for local communities. We were contracted back in last year, early midsummer, I would guess, to prepare the traffic impact and access study for this project. And that was all our counts were done pre-COVID. So they follow state guidelines and are considered as an acceptable data source. And we actually did some counts twice. We did, next slide. We did number of intersections that we felt would be most impacted by the project, going all the way out to Route 1A with Winter Street, and then Winter and Summer, Route 1 and North Street, Water Street, as well as the 3 intersections that create a triangle in Walpole that are formed by Summer Street, Neponset Street, Washington Street, Water Street, and Washington Street Extension. The next slide just shows the intersection itself that we call the triangle intersections. So we followed, we did our traffic counts. They were done originally in September, and we did follow-up counts in November. One of the reasons why we did the follow-up counts was after we had done some of our initial preliminary analysis work, we were seeing results that did not match what we had for existing conditions. So one of the things that we decided to do was at 3 key locations at the triangle intersections, we went out and we recounted them, but we also recorded the actual delays that vehicles experienced during the weekday morning commuter periods and the weekday evening commuter period to find out and try to use that data to calibrate our analysis results. And just as a brief summary, on the next slide are the results that we found. We looked at Summer Street coming eastbound to Washington Street. We looked at Washington Street southbound to Water Street. And we looked at Neponset Street northbound to Summer Street, which is on the next slide. And just to give you a brief summary, I'll go into a little more detail later. Level of service, traffic engineers, we grade intersections by levels of service, just like you were when you were back in school. Level of service A, of course, being good, and level of service F representing failure. And over the years, the Transportation Research Board, the Federal Highway Administration, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, those numbers have been broken down into a range of average delay over the entire hour to associate with a resulting level of service. So for instance, at a signalized intersection, if you had experienced on average anywhere between 20 and 35 seconds, that would correlate to a level of service C. But that same delay doesn't relate to an unsignalized intersection. If you had an unsignalized intersection that had 25 to 35 seconds of delay, that correlates to a level of service D. So signalized intersections have and in unsignalized intersections, they're both graded the same, but the range of values for those delays are slightly different. But just by order of magnitude, Leslie, go back one slide, please. In the morning there, you can see the weekday morning peak hour in table 2, the average peak hour delay for vehicles turning from Summer Street eastbound to Washington Street northbound in November last year was 10 seconds, but the maximum delay was 41 seconds we observed, and the average queue was 2. So we use this data and the data from the following two tables to calibrate our capacity analysis model, which I will talk about in a few minutes. So as we go on, we did a traffic study. We looked at crash history. We looked at pedestrian volumes, which I will talk about separately. We looked at Gillette Stadium traffic management because they have a whole plan that unfortunately is not in place this year. But I expect that sometime, maybe next year, maybe the following year, things might be back to a new normal. But at this point, nobody knows what that is. I was at a session this afternoon where we had 5 out of 6 of the state traffic engineers throughout New England on a panel, and they were all in the same boat. They all agreed, no one knows what we're looking at. Traffic volumes in Western Mass, for instance, are still down, but they're only down by about 10%. Whereas here in Boston, based on the state traffic engineer, the volumes are still down by 30%. So we don't know when it's coming back. So we looked at the crash history, and then we take our existing conditions and we project them out to the future. We used a 1% compounded growth rate. This was based on data from Mass DOT. And then we contacted the town and Foxborough next door because we're so close. And there were several projects that were identified that we either had their traffic studies or we used traffic generation information from the ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, to generate the traffic for these new projects. And we looked at what our project is going to generate, which is summarized on the next slide. Total, we're projecting 2016 daily trips on average. Cut that in half if you want to get the number of cars, because a car goes in, the car goes out over the course of a day. And, based on the unit mix that we had at the time, we project 136 vehicle trips, which would be 35 cars entering and 101 cars exiting during the morning peak hour, and 110 cars, everyone coming home from work, and 66 cars leaving. Those are pre-COVID numbers. We don't know what's going to happen again. A lot of people are working from home, and everything I have read and seen shows productivity levels have actually stayed the same or gone up, which is good. So, but these are the ITE numbers as they currently stand. So we have our traffic generation, and then we look at where they're going to and going from. The next slide shows the results of a gravity model we performed. We looked at census data for Walpole, where people live in Walpole, where do they work? And we took all that data, put it into a giant spreadsheet. We looked at the best routes to get to whichever town it is that you ended up working in. And, no question, it looks, 62% of the traffic was destined to Route 1, either north or south, mostly north. And, 21% heading up Washington Street into the center part of Walpole. So we have our no build volumes, we have our site generated volumes, we have our trip distribution pattern. We use a trip distribution pattern to distribute the site generated traffic volumes, and we add them onto the no build network, and we get our future build traffic flow networks, which we analyze. Next slide. Here is, as I briefly touched on earlier, the level of service tables, the top being the signalized intersections and the bottom being the unsignalized. Excuse me. You can see the range of delays go from 10 to 80 seconds for a signalized intersection, and 10 to 50 seconds for an unsignalized intersection. So we do our math, and the next couple of tables, tables 14 on the next two sheets, we put all this information into a software model that analyzes and does all the math for us. And this is the intersection of Route 1A rather, Winter Street and Jean Road, which shows that based on the trip patterns we have assigned, the level of service does not change from no build to build conditions. There is a slight increase in the morning peak hour delay, but a slight decrease overall in the evening delay. And that's capable because it depends on, it's a weighted average for the delay that gets calculated. And if we add movements volume to a movement that is not the critical movement, but it's one of the ones that helps the intersection operate well, it can actually pull the delay down. The next slide summarizes the level of service results for Route 1 and North Street. And again, because we have more traffic going there, we still have a level of service D in the morning and level of service C in the evening. Moving on to the next slide, it's going to be a little bit small, I'm sorry, but this is the unsignalized intersection results, unsignalized intersection level service results. And these are the results that when we first saw some of the existing conditions where we had the level service E, for instance, at Summer Street and Washington Street, and the level service F, we said, that doesn't match what we observed in the field. We were out there several times during the morning and during the afternoon, both in September and in November, and it didn't make sense. So what we did was we went back and recounted in November the intersections at the triangle, and we got the calibrated results, which I presented to you earlier, but then we took that data, input it into our software model to simulate, to get existing conditions, and then use that data going forward for our analysis. And that's summarized in the next slide. And the first column is our actual existing conditions results from the previous table. But you can see the three locations where we actually had information, the level of service, even though it says it's an F right now, the model based on the volumes we counted, but when we look at what the actual recorded delays and queues were, it's not an F, but it's a level service C. This shows us that the capacity analysis model and methodology for the unsignalized intersections is very conservative. I have done this many times over the past 15, 20 years because this anomaly, I guess the best way I can describe it, in the highly capacity software and the modeling for unsignalized intersections. The methodology for determining level of service for unsignalized intersections has not changed literally in 20, 25 years. I keep hoping every time the new capacity manual comes out that more research would be done for unsignalized intersections to come up with a better model to predict results, but that has not happened. So by doing that, what we have at the end of the day, if you look to the far right, we don't have a level service F under build conditions. We're at level service E, which is theoretical capacity, but we're not at capacity because if we were, then the theoretical capacity or the volume to capacity ratio, V over C, would be 1. And our projected V over C ratio is 0.87. So that's a summary of the analysis we did for the traffic study. I'm going to segue briefly into several other topics that we were asked to look at, or there were some questions raised. And the first one coming up is the location of the driveway in relation to the railroad. We've done, I gotta give Mr. Hale credit. He kept on sending me all kinds of interesting reading articles on the railroad crossing, and we found some information on our own. But here is a plan. We also had gone out as part of our effort, and we did a survey of Summer Street in the vicinity of where the driveway would be down to Neponset Street. And this plan shows the railroad crossing right in the middle pretty much, and where the proposed driveway will be. We looked at railroad operations. When we did our delay measurements, we also looked at railroad operations at the railroad tracks themselves. The next slide, please, Leslie. We actually went out and when we did our recording, we measured the time it took for the time a railroad flashing started to the time the railroad flashing stopped and the arm bars were back up in the upright position. And it turned out that it was about the entire time it took for that operation to occur was a minute. The range was 58 to 62 seconds. And then we broke it down even further for both northbound or southbound trains, and basically it was just about the same amount of time. But we also, on the next slide, we looked at, as part of our measurements, we recorded queues and delays for how long it took vehicle queues to clear after the fact. And in the weekday morning period in the westbound direction, the average westbound queue was 2 vehicles. And the average time it took for that queue to clear was 10 seconds. In the evening, it was a little bit longer. It was about 26 seconds in the westbound direction. And the queue was slightly longer. It was 8 vehicles. Now, keep in mind, there's about 10 trains a day that were running from Foxborough Stadium, Gillette Stadium up to Boston. That service has now been suspended due to lack of ridership. I could definitely point that as a result of COVID. But so what we did was we looked at the operations itself and what would have to happen, because the question had come up, what happens if someone tries to either, bypass the queue or turn out of our driveway and avoid the queue entirely and cross the tracks when there's a train coming. And the next slide shows what would have to happen in order to have that to happen. And in order for a vehicle to exit the site and perform the maneuver shown, because of the zigzag movement to cross the tracks and bypass the arm bars, that vehicle would have to be going 5 miles per hour. We have it, but do not have it right now. We ran a slide if there was no queue and the car is coming out of the site at, say, 30 miles per hour, that car would have to swing very wide and would actually end up passing through the post office building on the other side of the street, simply being the physical laws of physics in order to do that. So based on this and the volumes we observed pre-COVID, we do not expect there to be an issue with the railroad crossing and the location of the driveway. Next, what we did not do, I should say, in our original traffic study, but the town engineer, Carl Baldoff, asked us to look at was pedestrian activity. When we do our traffic counts, we always do count pedestrians and bicycles, but generally, unless you're doing a project that's in a major urban area where you have 10-foot wide sidewalks and a lot of pedestrian activity, we don't report on it. But he asked us to, and we did. We prepared a memo dated March 10th, 2020. And this is just to This graphic is solely for orientation purposes because when we developed the network graphics, we didn't exactly follow the geometry, but it's clear that you can see the crossings. And right now, you can see right now there at the intersection of Deposit and Summer Street, there is a diagonal crossing going across the middle of the intersection. And then down to the bottom of the screen, there's a crosswalk across Washington Street Extension and a crosswalk across Water Street. Further up, just outside the range of this picture, is the Boyden School. And there is another crosswalk right across from the school. So what we did was on the next 4 slides, we summarized the traffic volumes from the count data worksheets. And I think the largest pedestrian crossing volume we saw was 7 pedestrians. I believe it was on the next slide, Leslie. Yes, if you look, you can see in the lower right, is the number 7 and the number 2 in parentheses. This number 7 represents 7 pedestrians crossing Water Street during the weekday pedestrian peak hour period. So that count occurred from 8 to 9. Those 7 pedestrians crossed Water Street at that location. And we surmise that they either went into the church building on the corner or continued down Water Street, because if you look up to the next intersection of Washington Street and Summer Street, during that same hour, 8 to 9, no pedestrians were observed crossing the driveway at that location. So we did the analysis, and so the pedestrian volumes that we observed both in September and in November were very low. And next slide, Leslie. Next slide. Next slide. All right, and that's just another picture showing the triangle intersections. And I believe David Hale will be finishing up with our last slide.
So I think what Ken has presented is sort of a scientific approach to traffic, which is his job. And I think the result is that although the project will generate additional trips, it won't generate significant safety issues or failures of any of the existing infrastructure. That being said, we are committed to join the Neponset Valley Transportation Management Association upon occupancy, and that association has some capabilities to help us arrange common commuter transportation to the train stations and some other things that are aimed at reducing traffic. We're also committed to provide funding of $131,625 on the same per market unit basis as Liberty Station and 95 West Street toward off-site infrastructure. And you might remember that both of those projects committed $100,000 either in cash or in kind to off-site infrastructure. And that on average, one project was 150 units and the other 192 units. So that's an average of $585 per market rate unit. And I think we're committed to do the same thing so long as we don't end up having to litigate. So these funds, together with municipal funding, could be used for the following items within 24 months of the issuance of building permits for the development. And so, you know, we're not in the public infrastructure business. But there have been a number of things that have been mentioned in the process that may or may not be a priority for the town. One is a sidewalk along the north side of Summer Street between the railroad crossing and Neponset Street. A second would be the installation of flashing equipment at the crosswalk in front of the Boyden School. I think, there are now somewhere around 600 homes within 2 miles of the Boyden School. So technically all those kids could walk. Very few of them do, but, and there's no flashers on that crosswalk. And it's been suggested that the police department would like the speed limit to be reduced on Washington Street. And we don't have traffic counts there to do that. I think there was a misunderstanding there, but clearly, those are 3 things that the money could be used for. I think our concern is that if we're going to contribute to offsite infrastructure, that it should have something to do with priorities in the neighborhood. And that is the conclusion of our presentation. And my team is here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hale, and thank you for everybody for their input on that. So let me just go. We have Sean Reardon here for peer review, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you're not ready to comment now. That's okay, Sean, but do you want to make any comments at this point?
Sure, I'm always ready to comment.
Okay.
So first things first, the initial presentation about the changes, just want to say all those changes that were mentioned are all good changes. And I think you can even start to see in the rendering that they provided, the site's starting to loosen up. So, I like the idea of consolidating the units into larger buildings. That makes much less impervious area, much less parking. So all those things are good changes. And there are still some outstanding issues that I think need to be looked at, but working in the right direction. Specifically as it relates to traffic, I also have here tonight Rob Woodland from our office. Just in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a civil engineer, not a traffic engineer though. Rob knows all about these VC ratios and things like that. So if we get into in-depth stuff where him and Ken need to talk to each other, he's here to back me up. I think basically we come down to maybe 4, let's call them traffic related issues. The first is the impacts that the project's going to have on that triangle intersection. That's Neponset, Washington, and Summer. The project is definitely going to create impacts. And I think anybody in the neighborhood is going to tell you that intersection doesn't operate great. So if Ken's people saw it operating at a time where it operated well, and maybe he was out there at a good time. So I'd just be careful about extrapolating one-time anecdotal information or single occurrence traffic analysis to necessarily equate to all the experiences that people in the neighborhood experience out there. And our big issue is that when you look at their analysis, that intersection fails in the morning. It's going to fail worse when the project's here. In the evening, I think it goes from a C to an E. That's a big change in terms of level of service. And that doesn't even consider things like Gillette Stadium traffic, which I don't think responsibility, but it's something that has to be considered when you start looking at, well, how sensitive is this intersection to other things that maybe that the analysis doesn't reflect. Similar, the analysis really doesn't treat the fact that the railroad crossing is there, doesn't give the intersection any higher priority, or doesn't change the analysis in any way. Also, the fact that the school's right down the street from there, again, it heightens your concern. It doesn't really change foundationally the analysis, but it means you got to look at things a lot closer when you have these kind of issues nearby. And it's just disappointing that we've asked on a couple times for them to come up with mitigative solutions. I thought when we met with Ken in the sort of the sidebar discussion among the consultants that we were clear on that, but instead what we got was a response that it doesn't meet warrant analysis, which really wasn't what we were looking for. We were hoping that together we could come up with some good ideas and potential solutions that could be implemented out there on a a partnership basis or somehow, but you'd like to do something that solves the problems rather than just makes them worse. The railroad crossing, I think, that was a issue of mine in the beginning. I think Ken's provided some data that sort of reflects that the exiting driveway is quite a bit further away than the entering driveway. So a little less concerned about that now than I was in the beginning. But I think if you look at Ken's sketch, despite what he says, I can definitely see people trying to make that move that he shows on the plan. That doesn't seem too far-fetched to me. My attitude is if there's a real simple improvement that we can make that precludes that from happening, then maybe it's worth considering. But again, that's probably not a really high priority on my list. The intersection, the triangle intersection is more so. Then the PEDS issues, I think David mentioned about the priority of getting a sidewalk there. You're gonna have 46 new kids potentially walking to school or going to the Boyden School from that neighborhood. And you also have other kids walking through that intersection, combined with now more traffic going through that intersection. Certainly like to see a more proactive approach to solving some of the pedestrian issues around there. But again, haven't really gotten anything back from the applicant. And then last is just the whole idea of this being a single access point. Not really a traffic issue so much as just a general concern. They have provided a boulevard intersection or a boulevard road, which gives you two sort of barrels to sort of mitigate some of that. But I think it's important to realize that in some ways, the boulevard section can just get blocked just as easily as a single lane roadway. And in some cases, a boulevard section actually pulls away some of your utility because instead of having a 25, 26 foot wide piece of pavement to work in, you've got two separate 16-foot wide sections of pavement. So sometimes it makes it better, sometimes it makes it worse. So I think in summary, we've got some outstanding issues. The principal one being is the lack of a solution at that triangle intersection. Rob, if you want to offer anything or add anything, feel free.
Yeah, could I share my screen for a moment? Is my mic live? You guys hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yep.
Okay. If I could just share my screen, I'll just cover one real quick point and then let's see if I can do this. All right, can you see the Google image of the intersections?
Yep.
I do that right? All right, great. So just quickly, this is a triangle intersection, the school up here, approximately where their driveway is going to be. So the idea of providing enhanced sidewalk along this side of the street to prevent crossing across the entire intersection makes some sense, with a crosswalk connecting to this side of the street, going up to the school and providing a flashing beacon or supplementing the pedestrian crossing, as they suggested, has some merit. The one issue in looking at the analysis, and these two bars, and maybe you can zoom in just a little closer. So the yellow bar here is the no build condition in the PM, where the queue would spill back from this intersection. And based on the analysis they presented in their study, the red bar is the build queue in the PM with their project trips added to the intersection. So because these intersections are in such close proximity, the vehicle queue spilling back past the intersection will prevent the vehicles clearing out of these other side streets, causing a kind of a cascading effect of vehicle queues spilling back here. If these folks aren't able to exit the street and turn left, and there's already quite a vehicle queue on this approach, something like 600 feet, the demand for this movement being blocked by this queue will have an impact on the future operations of the intersection. That will result in a longer queue spilling back in this direction, making this movement, the left turn movement out of here, difficult. So the whole issue, I just wanted to point out, just basically in a nutshell, the level of service was going to be projected to go from LOS C, which is very good operations, certainly acceptable operations, even though there was some queuing that spills back in the PM, to LOSE, which is really just pushing the capacity of the system, but resulting in longer queues that will spill back to the adjacent intersections. This one will spill back and cut off this intersection. This one cuts off this intersection. So what we were looking for wasn't necessarily to install a traffic signal that might have been a potential solution. We were looking for a solution that would address the vehicles trying to get through this intersection. Again, just zooming out, the bulk of their traffic will be heading through these intersections. And in the PM, most of those vehicles are heading back from the highway and then turning onto the street and turning into the driveway here, which results in this queue spilling back at the intersection. So we were just looking for some type of improvement that they could identify that would address some of these capacity issues with a unusual layout of these intersections. You have the triangle intersections here and then an additional leg coming off here. You had the pedestrian crossing here because of the lack of sidewalks, crossing diagonally across the intersection, which isn't typical. I think that's partially alleviated if sidewalk was constructed along this side of the street. A new crosswalk and ramps were tying in with a complete sidewalk completion of this portion that would get you a viable walking path to the school, coupled with a flashing beacon or police officer control, whatever supplemental crossing would be warranted in this location to get the kids to school would address one of our concerns. But the vehicle queue spilling back on this approach is something on the order of 500 or 600 feet. So there's already going to be frustrated drivers that are going to pass through this intersection, and they're going to accept shorter gaps in the traffic flow. They'll force their way into traffic when the operations bump up into the capacity, pushing the capacity intersection. And we were looking for some kind of improvement. Now, just to give a quick example, one thing that could be done, and we had suggested, was potentially coming up with striping and signing at the intersection to prevent vehicles from blocking the intersection, or at least encouraging vehicles with a do not block box at the intersection, so that these vehicle queues would not block the left turn exiting movement out of the side street. This would be painted in here and signed in such a way where these vehicle queues, if they were to extend past in the intersection, would be instructed to stop further back and not block this approach. Same thing with this street. These vehicle queues spilling back to the intersection, a do not block box with signage here would allow these vehicles to enter the traffic flow rather than be cut off by this vehicle queue. That's not going to solve the entire problem at this intersection. Other solutions could be a rethinking of the geometry at this location, up to and including closing off streets to simplify the flow, or creating a circulation element like a roundabout, modern roundabout, to better handle the flow, or even one-way directionality on the triangle so that the conflicting movements aren't in conflict with each other, or that those conflicting movements are simplified to one location. So that's basically the comments we had. Ken prepared the study following the standards. I think the study area they looked at was acceptable. I think their trip generation distribution was all correct. We just had a lasting concern that this triangle intersection has some challenges today, and the projections that they provided still showed that these vehicle queues, even with the calibrated results, were going to block these intersections. And we just really were looking for a creative solution to solving these capacity constraints at this triangled intersection. Again, I threw out a couple of quick ideas that would alleviate some of the flow, not suggesting, nor are we responsible for developing the type of improvements that should go here, but we just recognize that there is a need for improvement at the triangle intersection, in addition to providing enhanced pedestrian access to the school. So that's all I had, Sean, just to add to what you had already mentioned.
Thanks, Rob.
Oh, I can not share my screen, or someone can take it over if they wish.
Okay, thank you, Rob and Sean. So now I'm going to open it up to any board members. If you have any questions, because I've got a whole list of them. But whoever wants to go, just take yourself off mute and we can go.
I'll
For
start.
me to go, John?
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
A couple of questions on the traffic counts. I see the traffic counts in the morning were done from 7 to 8. And Boyden School doesn't open up until 8:30, 8:45. So that didn't even include, I mean, it would include some of the teachers, but it wouldn't include the students in the traffic. So to me, that's an issue.
Mr.
And
Chairman,
David
should I
has
address
said-
those questions as they come up, or do you want me to wait till the
Sure,
end?
whatever, John, what would you like?
Yeah, yeah, Suzanne, if what we'll do is we'll pose the question and we'll let the consultants or the engineers provide a comment. So the question is the times, because I actually looked it up. Great thing about technology, Boyden School starts at 8:25 and it gets out at 2:55. So yes, Mr. Cram, do you want to address that?
We did our traffic counts in the morning from 7 to 9 and in the afternoon from 4 to 6:30, which are standard times for traffic counts for residential developments.
The slide that was put up in front of me said 7 to 8.
Correct. That slide was when that was what the actual peak hour for what that slide was showing at that time. That was just the peak hour itself.
Okay. And you're still not, the developer is still not addressing stadium events at all, I'm taking it.
We're not responsible for stadium events.
Okay,
And our
thank you.
traffic is great.
Thank you. I'm all set on that one.
Okay, are you all set, Suzanne?
For now, yeah, I can't believe that answer, but that's what I'm getting.
No, and that's why, you know, we'll look at it and look
We
at
will.
and stuff like that. So
Thank you. I'm good for now.
Bob Fitzgerald, go ahead.
Thanks, John. I guess this might be initially a question to Rob and Sean. When I look at the number of parking spaces that are proposed and the number of trips and the combination of trips and parking spaces that are proposed, it's of such a size that it would require MIPA review, as I understand it, an ENF, were there to be some sort of state approval required. And in that context, I'm trying to understand, given the magnitude of, you know, the MIPA sort of intended to capture the larger projects, and this, I think, would qualify for that. Is it typical in your experience that there is offsite traffic mitigation associated with projects with, you know, more than 2,000 daily trips associated with them, or with, you know, parking spaces on the order of, I think it's 660 or 670 at a single project?
Well, I'd say regardless of trips, that your traffic mitigation is typical for most projects. So it's a sliding scale. I mean, you can have a project that's right near a highway interchange and there's no need, but in this case, I'd be surprised if on a typical project like this, you wouldn't expect to do some traffic mitigation.
And that kind of mitigation that were the kinds of things Rob was laying out in terms of, you know, either signalization or short of that, some sort of mitigation measures to manage the flow of traffic at critical times of day.
Yeah, at least some proactive responds to addressing a known problem that gets exacerbated by the project.
Um, I did have, I don't know, sort of the status of the warrant analysis, but it did generate some comments from, I believe it was the police department. So I kind of read through that and had some questions about that as well. So it indicated at the beginning that there were these 9 different warrants, and if one of them were met, then it would justify implementing a signal. And in the analysis of that, it looked like for warrant article or warrant number 1, the requirement was to use a data set of 8-hour data, and the applicants indicated that there was only 4 hours of data available. And I'm curious if that is I mean, I would assume that 8 hours of data could be collected by observation. I'm just curious why that is a non-factor, I guess, in evaluating warrant number 1.
And you want to answer that?
Yeah, at the time when we first did our counts back in September and November, we were not thinking of signalization. So we did not even think to do our normal procedure would be to do counts from 6 or 7 in the morning to 6 or 7 at night. So we would encompass a typical average day. So we did our warrant analysis based on the data we had. We could not go out now and do a warrant analysis based on current conditions solely because of COVID. The volumes are definitely way down. So that's why we use the data we had. But typically you look at, during a normal day, you have your spikes of volumes in the morning, and they go down, and then you have probably another little spike at midday, lunchtime trips and so forth. And then at the end of the day, during your evening rush hour, you have another spike. So we looked at the volumes that we had, and if they don't meet it now for the existing peak hours, it's a very good likelihood that it would not meet it for the other 9 to 4, that's 7 hours in the middle of the day that we don't have data for.
But so I'm not a traffic engineer either, but is that a peak hour analysis, or is that a cumulative over an 8-hour period?
Warrant 1 is a cumulative. Warrants 1 and 2. Warrants 1, the way they rewrote it. Warrants 1 is over an 8-hour period typically.
Okay. And so for those 4 hours that you didn't have data, did you just use zeros for those hours, or not add any traffic as?
Correct. We did not do any traffic for those 4 hours, for 30 hours in between. We just looked at the 4 hours of data we had data for.
Okay. Let's see. And then I guess another question had to do with warrant number 3, which indicated, I guess the analysis indicated that it would meet warrant 3 for the peak hour during the weekday evening period. But then there's a statement about it being applied only in unusual circumstances. And I wonder if you could explain. It sounds like that's the position is, yes, it violated the warrant, but it's sort of a non-issue.
Right. Well, Mass DOT clearly states in the warrants to the 2009 Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, warrant 1 is to be used. The peak hour warrant is used for extraneous circumstances where you may have some large generator of traffic that lets all their traffic exit the site between, let's say, 4 and 5 o'clock on a weekday. And it just, because the volume is so high, it has to be controlled. An example might be, it's not a very good example, but it's what's coming to my mind right now. The IRS facility on Route 133 in Andover. During the day, it didn't meet the warrant at all for a signal. But, and this is before some of the development occurred in that area. But what happened is they had police details that were there from roughly about 3:45 to 5 o'clock to allow the 1,000 employees or so that worked at the IRS to exit onto Route 133 to get to 93 or wherever they were going to get home. But that was the only time the detail was there. Since that time, more development has occurred along that part of the corridor, and now a traffic signal has been installed at that location because the developments across the street helped trigger the warrant.
Okay. Thanks for that. On number 5, it talks about no school crossings, and there's not literally one at the project site, but there is one within relatively short walking distance. Can you explain what's the proximity to a school crossing that you need in order to trigger that warrant?
It virtually has to be at the school. I mean, the Boyden School is what, 1,000 feet away from Neponset Street. So what should happen there is most likely there should be typical, school signs indicating that there's a school there. And as we suggested, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon for that crosswalk there should definitely be installed.
Okay. And the conclusions on number 7 and 8, are those based on your original traffic study? There wasn't really an explanation provided for why they didn't meet that warrant. So I was just curious if that's just based on the data that's in your traffic report.
Right, correct. The intersection doesn't have a high crash rate. And warrant 8. Warrant 8 is where you have a situation where you have a number of signals. Let's say they're evenly spaced every 500 feet. And you go every 500 feet, you have a signal, then you go 1,000 feet or so, and you're in that 1,000 feet. Then, because of, you want to maintain progression through the corridor, it might make sense that you might meet that warrant to help maintain that traffic flow progression through that corridor. That would not be the case on Neponset Street to Water Street.
And then I had one question for Mr. Hale on the discussion of the contributions to the offsite mitigation. You had the analysis of what had been provided for the other 2 projects, 95 West and Liberty Square. And then you had a list of possible mitigation measures. And I think the language on the slide was that your contribution together with municipal funding might be able to accomplish that mitigation. Do you have a sense for how much municipal funding would be required in addition to your contribution to complete that mitigation?
It really depends on what the town's priorities are.
Well, of that bullet list that you had there, I'm just focused on what you had listed. If all of those were to be implemented to address offsite mitigation, and trying to get a sense for the contribution of the project as compared to what the, a rough estimate of the total cost of that offsite mitigation would be.
My guess is that contribution would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 or 3/4.
I don't have any other questions, but I don't know if Sean or Rob would like to follow up on anything I asked or had any further questions.
Yeah, just real quick. So the warrant analysis is generally, it's an analysis that you do to determine whether a signal is warranted, a signal. I don't think what Rob and I had asked for necessarily included a signal. In fact, I mean, that probably wasn't what we were thinking. So we were kind of surprised that we got a warrant analysis back when what we asked for were mitigative solutions. So I'm not sure where the intent of the warrant analysis came from. That wasn't directed from us.
For us.
Mr. Hale, do you want to comment on why you decided to do the warrant analysis?
I think Ken felt that it was asked for. So it's highly unusual. In fact, I've never done been through a permitting process where peer review, didn't provide written comments. And so I think there were some written comments back in April, but so we felt that the warrant analysis was asked for.
Okay, that's fine. I mean,
We were looking for solutions to solving some of the issues at the triangle intersection. A signal possibly could have been something that could be looked at. The signal warrant analysis that we received didn't have the appendix material attached, so we could take a look at the volumes that were used. And the 8-hour analysis, I understand that they weren't able to pick up additional data due to COVID. That's not an unusual situation. But the idea was we weren't trying to hem them into any particular solution. We just wanted them to address the queuing issue and the mutual spilling back of the triangled intersections in some manner. I had pointed out that there would be some potentially low-hanging fruit that would make an improvement with signage and striping as a possible solution. But there potentially was other geometric considerations at the intersection, perhaps closing a street and concentrating the flow where the side street did meet the signal warrant, or simplified the traffic flow through the area. If you look at the triangle, just imagine there's a 4-way intersection with always stop condition that has some challenges in the PM. And one of the legs of the intersection continues up and then intersects further up on Washington Street. It's possible that that is a redundant leg of vehicular movement, and that changes in the geometry would be a solution, or considering a layout that's different than the two intersections at such close proximity to each other, like maybe a roundabout. So,
I think Rob is making a point that I've made in the past, which is that this infrastructure is really, it's the purview of the town. We have no capability of
Rob's
proposing.
not making that point, Dave.
Well, he
Sorry,
is, because
don't say that. All we've asked for is for you guys to
So,
take some
can I finish what I was
responsibility.
saying, please?
Sure, but don't tell.
Okay, yeah,
So
first
let
off-
me
first
finish.
off, everything goes to the chair, not back and forth. And Mr. Hale, you did say that what Mr. Woodland was saying, and then you started. So, and then Mr. Reardon corrected you. He said, that's not what he's saying. So say what you want to say, and
Okay.
this will go smooth.
So things like closing off streets, they're beyond our purview and beyond this board's purview. There may be some solutions out there to that triangle, that would help the community. But they're not directly related to our project, although we'll impact them. And I think the approach is funding and then getting together and agreeing how to best use that funding. That's all that we're saying is, we can throw out any solution. I don't know if it's going to work for the DPW or whoever. And I think a better approach is to agree on a value of funding and then get together and agree on, you know, where to spend it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hale. Any other board members have any questions or comments?
Just one quick follow-up to that. Pedestrian safety is in your purview.
So
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Chairman, let me just respond to that. We've offered funding that can be used to improve pedestrian safety.
Right.
It's a question of where the town wants to focus those funds.
And I recognize that's a step in the right direction. What it is, it's funding based on a calculation of another project, not on the funding needed to solve the problem of the pedestrian traffic and the vehicle traffic in the area.
So, you know, let's just think about the fact that there was just a warrant article proposed to allow people to rent spaces for parking for Gillette events. That has a much greater potential to affect pedestrian traffic than our project. You know, this is public infrastructure and it services all kinds of different people and events, and we're willing to contribute.
Okay, you're bringing up something that didn't even take place at town meeting. This question about an article that was withdrawn about parking in South Walpole on people's private property. So that's not, that didn't even come up at town meeting. So Jane Coffey, did you have a question or comment?
yes, I had a couple of comments. First of all, not to beat a dead horse, I realized this traffic study was done prior to the COVID, and I think it's obviously going to be pretty difficult to ascertain exactly. I mean, we can't change time, unfortunately. I think the neighbors are going to be very concerned, would rather have seen, and it's an impossible now, the traffic, foot traffic between 8:15 and 8:30. And I know it's picky, but it's really going to be important to them. And with regard to the impact of this, I find it difficult to understand how Mr. Hale can state that, you know, the impact of these things may or may not be important in his responsibility or in any developers. As I see it, when somebody is presenting a project such as this, I would think that the impact of everything around it would be considered. For instance, he said he's not responsible for stadium. Well, in the same vein, he's not responsible for the Boyden School, and he's not responsible for the post office or train. So, you know, I think we are kind of getting into muddy waters, but I do feel very, very strongly that all of these things are important. And while Mr. Hale has offered funds to somewhat mitigate that, I think at least how I perceive that is, yes, this is a problem. So here's the money, you fix it. I'm going to go on with the rest of my project. And I would think that while it's noteworthy and certainly appreciative that he wants to step in and do, I think that's admirable. But it more or less abdicates his responsibility for those things that we've raised a concern about. And in so doing, it puts the responsibility on us. Here's the money, you go fix it. We don't know, as Bob has said, we don't know how much that money is going to be, how much money that beyond what he has offered it's going to cost. And I think that would be important. If there's an issue that we brought up that needs to be addressed, I would think that the applicant would say, okay, you've raised these issues, therefore, you know, we'll sit down and figure out just how we're going to do it. And I tell you quite honestly, for people up there in South Walpole, while it may seem like it's not a big deal for the stadium, I gotta tell you, if you live up there or you drive up there, those stadium events are a major nuisance for those people. They flood nonstop traffic. It's not like they're going slowly. They all want to get out of there. And at times when the weather's bad, inclement weather, it's a nightmare up there. So I do think it's something. No, Mr. Hale, you can't fix it and you can't stop it, and it isn't your fault. But it does have an impact, in my mind, on the traffic. And given the fact that people are coming and going from this and relatively narrow one way in and one way out, same way in and out, I do think it's important to at least recognize that it does have an impact, and to allude to the fact that, well, it's not responsible, you're not really, but in essence, it does become part of things in that area that will impact how the residents and the safety of people there. That's the only comment. And I do want to say, Mr. Cram, I think you've done an excellent job here. There's no doubt about it. But it's going to be extremely difficult because of the COVID to try and second guess what everything is going to be. And it's funny because when people come forward with projects and they have a traffic engineer, it's interesting because the material is all there and it's backed up scientifically, but somehow or other for the people in the neighborhood, the perception is it's never going to be that it's going to be all right. So that's the only comment I want to bring.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Dave or Drew, any comments at this time?
Yeah, I got a couple, John. Construction traffic. I know we're talking about permanent future traffic of residents who will actually live in the area and want to abide by the town rules. But when you talk about the construction sequence potentially being 2 years for that project, in the amount of vehicles entering and exiting with one entrance and one exit, I haven't heard anything from the applicant or I guess peer review that they've heard anything regarding what are their proposals to mitigate hazards to the school children in that area during the construction timeframe. I guess I could wait for a response or keep going on, but I'm guessing
Drew,
that there hasn't.
Drew, we did ask for a construction phasing plan or some construction management plan just to give some framework to that discussion. So we have nothing.
Right, and Sean, I guess, has there been any proposed mitigation plans by the developer for that construction sequence, whether it's to have police details or some sort of traffic mitigations during the construction? I mean, we're talking about 18-wheelers and large construction vehicles. We're not talking about people that, might sideswipe a railroad crossing. We're talking about large construction vehicles coming in and leaving the project area during that time frame, which could potentially take up to 2 years. I think that's certainly something that the neighborhood would like to, feel comfort in knowing that the applicant's taken that into consideration.
Yeah, we haven't seen any documentation on anything related to construction traffic or any kind of phasing or anything like that.
Okay.
And we did ask for it.
Thank you. The other question I had was, and this might be for Robert, is there any potential that's been assessed as far as Willow Street? That's kind of a cut through to get around the triangle intersection, and I didn't hear anyone speak to it. So I guess I'm just wondering if that's been mentioned at all or thought about.
We didn't propose any specific types of solutions. There may be some larger pattern changes or one-way streets or whatever that might make some sense or handle the rerouting traffic through this intersection. That's a possibility. But we didn't ask the proponent to prepare that. We were just looking for something, and we didn't want to put any, we didn't want to tie his hands. to come up with something that would improve the traffic flow. And the idea behind coming up with what might be, of course, there's some existing problems out there today. They will be exacerbated by the project, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are fully responsible for addressing all the ills in the town. But what we typically would expect is if we recognize that we believe that there's an issue and an impact, that's a solution is developed by the applicant, that a price for implementing that solution is derived. And then if there is a fair share mechanism that's appropriate, that the board would consider as a mitigating situation to the project, recognizing that some types of improvements would be perhaps beyond this project's ability to pull off by themselves, but would be material in understanding what portion of that type of solution that they could be held responsible for. And so the basic idea is to come up with what might work, figure out what that's going to cost, and then if it's a reasonable cost and offsets the project, then perhaps the board would consider making that a condition of approval to address a specific safety, pedestrian safety or vehicular safety issue. But so far we haven't seen a solution that would address some of the intersection issues that their own study, I believe, points that they will have material impact on. And so there's a lot of ideas that we didn't look at. We weren't specifically diving in and trying to solve this problem. We were just asking the applicant to try and come up with some solutions. And so far we haven't had a chance to see those.
Okay, hey, Drew, do you have anything else?
Yeah, just a couple quick things. So we're going up an extra story. I don't think there was another lighting plan or photometric study submitted with that we could review. Obviously, the additional height to the building, there's a potential for more light, light from the area. And then my final thought was just, the sum of money that was proposed to help by the applicant to submit to the town. I'm wondering what the time frame of relevancy with those projects were to current.
A question?
Yeah, I think the question is the payment to the town, Mr. Hale, would that be upon issuance of building permits or at what point? And then could the town then use that money to start doing the improvements that are necessary?
The answer is yes upon issuance of building permits. And also, yes, the town could then start using the money. And we'd prefer that the money was, used in a relatively short period, and that the agreed upon projects were prosecuted.
Okay, thank you. Drew Delaney, anything else?
That's all I have, John. Thank you.
Okay. David? Dave Anderson, I'm sorry.
John, could I make one other comment?
Sure. Sure, go ahead.
I forgot to mention with regard to the trains, much to the consternation of the neighbors up there. When this was first proposed as a pilot program, it was pretty clear that the pilot program is going to remain. Not only is it going to remain, but the number of trips were going to increase, and the speed was going to be increased. So while right now we're looking at COVID and it may be shut down, that nevertheless is still something that's going to impact, because eventually, if we ever get out of this COVID, eventually they will be having more trains going faster. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I don't know how that can be addressed, but it's one more thing to.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. This might be for Brent or Katie. Parking under the buildings. In the original plan, was there parking under the buildings?
There was, this is Brent Mogul. There were parking under two of the structures, two of the four structures.
Okay, and so now it's parking under the two, now we're down to two buildings
Correct.
and it's parking under that, under the two structures. Would this be, is the building going to be elevated above the grade for this, or is it going to, or is the parking truly going to be below grade?
It averages 3 to 4 feet above grade because the site will be sloping over the length of the building. So some of it will be grade level and some will be beneath.
Okay.
Above, and it's an average.
Okay. And the next question has to do with the height of the buildings. These are now 6-story buildings. How about the elevator rooms and HVAC equipment on the roofs? Or what is it just going to be a straight 6-story building, or will there be additional things on top of the roofs?
No, that's a good question. Of course, the penthouse will have to go above the roof and there will be mechanical equipment on the roof, some on the grade. But generally we keep the rooftop units above the hallway in the middle of the structure. So a building of that height, you'd have to be quite some distance away to see the rooftop units.
Okay, and do you have an idea of the new height of these buildings?
Well, it's interesting by the way the zoning measures height, they measure it to the midpoint of a pitched roof, but to the top of a flat roof. So this will actually be only like 2 foot 2 inches higher than the old roof was measured by zoning.
And is that because it's now going to be a flat roof and before it was a
That's
pitched
correct.
roof? Is that?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. Can somebody answer where you are with conservation as far as the 2 wetland crossings that were that are shown in your plan?
So I believe we have 1 or 2 more hearings with conservation. And I know that you have an interest in the second crossing. We are not going to abandon the second crossing. There's no regulatory reason for us to abandon the second crossing. Not only that, there'll be 5 affordable units over there, and those affordable units will be invaluable to the families that take advantage of that. And so we will build the project as proposed now.
Okay, but you still don't have approval from Concom for the 2 wetland crossings, is that correct?
Well, we don't have an order of conditions, but we will, either from COMCOM or from DEP.
Okay. The only other thing in my notes I had with 2016 daily trips and the peak, it seemed like the peak was about 13% of the daily trips. Is that normal? Is that a traffic study wise, is that in the normal range that it's about 13%? And I guess, Mr. Woodland, you could answer that if you can.
8 to 12% is in the ballpark. They followed the ITE trip generation rates for each land use. It looks like they've done their calculations correct. So it's in the ballpark. What happens is there's peak spreading. Some people start their day earlier. Some people, I haven't gotten home yet. So some people don't get home right at 5 o'clock. Yeah, that's not atypical.
Okay, good. That's all I had for questions.
I
Judy-
have one quick one, John.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Sorry, it's for Sean. I know that you were working on the safety of the railroad crossing being right at the entrance, the only entrance to this facility. Was the feedback that you got from the applicant sufficient?
wasn't what we had hoped for, but it's better than what we got on the triangle intersection. So
Well, that's
I
that's
still
because
have
that
some, I still have some concerns, and I guess just a bit surprised because it's such a modest improvement that would sort of answer the question. So, you know, I need to look a little bit deeper into what we got. I mean, a lot of what we got was not responsive to our requests. Some of what we got was, and it was illustrative. So I want to give them credit for that.
I just remember you had mentioned something about an island, and that was about as far as I thought.
Yeah, and really, this is all we're talking about. So
Yeah.
the move that Ken Cram showed can be precluded with a small island there. Now, to David's point, maybe the MBTA doesn't let us do it, but you know, I mean, it seems like a very simple olive branch to just do something that can demonstrably make that intersection safer and address an adjacency issue that we identified as a concern. You know, I mean, Rob will say he's not as concerned as I am. Maybe, you know, he's a traffic guy and I'm a civil guy, but I see people doing stupid things all the time. So it certainly be something that would make things better.
Did you jump the tracks as a kid?
I did a lot of things, and I still do a lot of wrong things.
All right, well, thank you. I'm all set, John. Thank you.
The only thing I'd throw out at the railroad track is what we were hoping is that they would be able to cite a regulation that they met that, and their conclusion in the report was clear that they felt that was safe and met a regulation or a standard. That's what we were kind of looking for, but I give them credit for developing the graphics that they did. I didn't like the idea of putting up an island per se. I don't know that that would be the right solution, but one thing that could be looked at is extending the arms across the intersection. So instead of only dropping down the arm to block one half of the two-way traffic, you just have a longer arm that shuts it both, and that would preclude it.
Yeah.
So there's different types of gates. You know, at the time that gate was just updated, there wasn't an intersection 40 feet from it. So I think I definitely give the development team credit. I thought they did take a hard look at that question we had. I think ideally we would have had a more specific language saying we looked at this, it meets its standard, therefore we conclude that this is safe. And we just wanted cover for the town in case there was some incident in the future. But relative to a potential solution, I think the type of crossing arms that come down that only block half the direction of travel allows for a zigzag movement, even though it may not be something that would happen on a regular basis or necessarily something that would be on the top of my list to try and address. We just want to make sure that the standards were met, and it was clearly stated that their engineer has reviewed it and says this will be safe. And in lieu of that, if there was a potential solution that would improve the safety or is warranted because of this new condition of a driveway being 40 feet from the center of the track, that was looked at more carefully. So I thought there was other issues. And again, I do give the development team credit for the additional survey they picked up that we asked for picking up the existing sidewalk. When they initially surveyed out there, they didn't have the conditions of the current sidewalk and crossing arms, which were fairly recently replaced, is my understanding. And so the new plans that they had showed the existing conditions of the equipment out there. And, you know, I give them credit where credit is due, but I wouldn't put up an island to block their driveway. I would put up longer arms so that in both directions of travel, nobody could do a snake move through the intersection. And I'm not suggesting that that's what they have to do here. What I think Sean was looking for is that they looked at all of the alternatives and nothing was warranted for them to have to implement to preclude a potential unsafe maneuver. So I had different.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think it goes back to the issue that I think from the very beginning, everybody's been concerned about how close this project is to the railroad track.
Yeah.
And it seems like a missed opportunity if we don't do what we can to make it better, if it's reasonable. So to Rob's point, I think that's a better idea than what I had, but I'm not a traffic guy, so I have an excuse. And I brought him, he's the smart one. But yeah, I just think it's something that there's a lot of sensitivity, there's a lot of drama to it, that we should be looking for ways to make it better, not just looking for ways to sort of pass it on.
So, Mr. Chairman, and Ken's going to cringe when I say this, but we did study this issue. I made Ken read a half a dozen studies. One study that covered 7 Midwestern states stated that for gated rail crossings, you could expect 1 accident for every million crossings. So a train had to go through the crossing 1 million times. 1 million times. So, at our current schedule, we're looking at 124 years. So I took this seriously. Ken took this seriously. There are solutions where they have gates that cover all lanes of traffic, and I think they're all controlled by whoever controls the right of way, the MBTA, whoever it is, and this is a rural road. I think they just put these in. They decided that this was a safe solution, and I think it is. I think they're, and by the way, people coming out of our development are no more likely to break the law than anyone else.
Why are you talking about people breaking the law, Mr. Hill?
Because in order to cross the tracks while the light is flashing, you're breaking the law. The light flashes, you have to stop.
Okay. You just mentioned the bit about 1 million million crossings. What is that vehicle crossings, or is that
No, rail crossings.
rail crossings?
So it's a complicated issue, and Ken
Because
wouldn't have said what I just said.
And I just want to let everybody know that if it's vehicle crossings, it's one every 1.35 years. So there is a big difference between 145 years and 1.35 years, depending on, and I want to be clear, what is the actual crossing that we're talking about? Okay. At this point,
Can I ask just 2 quick questions, John?
go ahead, Bob.
Just in terms of the traffic studies, it's my understanding, and we were talking about that first warrant, and the whole study in terms of actual traffic counts is based on 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening on a single day. Is that correct? Is that in terms of the existing traffic counts? I'm asking, I guess.
No,
Mr.
that's
Cram,
incorrect.
do you want to answer that?
It's typically based on traffic studies. We go out and we do counts, depending on the type of proposed project. If it's residential, you look at the weekday morning and the weekday evening peak hour. And yes, typically traffic studies, you go out and you will do turning movement counts on one day. You try and get a weekday. You don't typically do a Monday. You don't typically do a Friday because, lots of people take long weekends. Mondays, people are getting to work because they partied and cried when the Patriots lost the day before, or it's on a Friday, everyone's staying later, going for happy hour, whatever. Mondays and Fridays are typically not counted. Typically, we do our counts on a Wednesday or a Thursday. They pretty much represent typical days. And in this case, the triangle intersections got counted twice, back in September and in November.
Okay. But so 2 days worth of data over the 2 hour periods, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening.
Right, 2.5 hours in the afternoon. I do 4 to 6:30.
Okay. And then just another question regarding, I'm curious if the project, this is maybe for Mr. Hale, has gone through MIPA review or plans to?
We have not. And we may or we may not.
Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, and Bob, on that question about the MIPA review, would that be and I'm asking you, Bob, is that something you'd see as a condition that we would just put in there saying,
No, we can't require it as a condition. I'm just the size of the project just suggests to me that it would be subject to MIPA review, but and that would generate potentially comments from state agencies who would review the proposal and have their own sort of concepts about appropriate mitigation. So if that were to happen, that certainly would inform the board in terms of what other folks thought about mitigation and that sort of thing.
Well, just one point of information on that. So for MIPA review to be required, you need two things. You need to trip a threshold like you described, but you also need what's called the state action, which is you need a permit from the state or some reason for the state to get involved to subject them to that review. So they need both to trip a threshold and a state action.
Right. And I think, there's financial assistance as well, which,
right.
Comes into play here and the site approval process through the DHCD, that's a state approval. Request for a superseding order of conditions is also a state approval. So there could be others. I'm not, doing a state permit analysis of the project or anything, but it just struck me that there's a likelihood of it. And, I just was curious what the status was, and if we could benefit from any of that process, it would certainly be helpful to the board.
Okay, some really good points there, Bob. Thank you. We do have Judy Barrett with us. Judy, good evening. Is there anything that you would recommend for us at this point moving forward?
I'm not even sure where to begin. I'm a little bit baffled about why there seems to have been a disconnect between what the peer review consultants were suggesting and what the applicant came back with. I'm just really concerned about why there seems to be so much confusion, especially where the applicant is so determined to bring this process to a close pretty soon. It just seems to me that there's a lot of loose ends here, and I'm not quite sure. I'm just not used to seeing this at this point. So I'm not sure I have a comment, John, as much as just kind of a concern about where we are with this project.
Okay, because I do have one thing I was going to ask you this, Judy. Is it appropriate now to have the peer reviewers and the applicants, traffic engineers, collaborate to solve some of these issues that have been identified? Should they be collaborating, or is that not?
I think they should. I mean, I think they should be communicating. I'm sure, I would suggest, Sean, I'm not sure of everything you've been giving to Ashley, but in light of the confusion that seems to have ensued here, it would probably be good for whatever it is that you guys discuss to follow up with some kind of a technical memo or something to Ashley, just so there's a matter of record here as to what your understanding is. And you may have already been doing all that. I'm just saying, I think it sounds like somebody needs a piece of paper to kind of document what the discussion was. So that would probably be a good idea. But yeah, I mean, I think these consultants need to be talking. And if they need to bring the peer review architect in so that everybody who's on the technical side of this is talking, so the board gets, consistent and coherent recommendations. Yeah, I would just say these people need to get in a room together.
So, Mr. Chairman,
necessary.
This has been a very unusual process. Typically what happens is peer review provides comments. We answer the comments in writing. There's some sort of communication that goes on, but we're 9 months into this project. And, I think one of the things that I think needs to be recognized is that the triangle is not directly in front of our project. While we impact it, the impact is limited, and there's a lot of private property around that triangle. And there's driveways, there are things that it's not just the peer reviewer and us, it's really the town. And what works, I think our approach to provide funding is a good approach. If I propose something and it ticks off some property owner who lives adjacent to that, that's not appropriate.
I don't think that's the issue. I mean, my understanding is that typically you come to some agreement about what the mitigation, what's the appropriate mitigation. There's a price associated with that, and some percentage of it is the applicant's responsibility, and some of it may be the town, but it's not even clear to me yet what the appropriate mitigation is. I'm not sure there's any agreement about this.
And, I think that's just the point, isn't it?
I don't know. I've never seen an application go through a process in quite such a disjointed way. Usually I see applicants and their consultants really trying to work with the peer review consultants to come to some consensus.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I am. Oh,
We've
yeah.
been prevented from talking to town officials and from peer review from the get-go. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Well, geez, that was part of the work session. So I don't think you were prevented from talking to people then.
But since then, what have we got?
It looks to me like your application's in chaos, sir, to be honest with you.
Okay,
No, my application is on the money.
okay. So Judy, I think you answered my question, which is, should the peer reviewers and the applicants, engineers and traffic folks be collaborating? And I guess they should have been all along, and maybe we'd be further along if they had been.
I can't comment on that. All I can say is, yeah, I think if you guys want to get to a place where you can write a permit that some poor building inspector can actually interpret and apply later, that people need to get a lot closer than they are right now.
Okay.
I don't want to see a permit come out of this with 200 conditions associated with it because there were too many loose ends at the end.
All right. I agree. It's much better to have things agreed upon in this process as opposed to conditions that are then going to be hard to interpret. So, okay, Town Council, Amy Questle, good evening. Any guidance for us at this point?
Well, as the person that's going to be drafting the decision, I would also not want to see 800 conditions. I would agree with Judy, and I would agree with Sean that this is quite disjointed and fragmented.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to remind the board.
Mr. Hale, she's talking.
Can you hear me? Is that? Oh, okay.
We could hear you.
So I would also agree that that the traffic, particularly with traffic mitigation, that does need to be addressed in a different way. I think there's other questions that arose from tonight. For example, you have all of these apartments. None of them are 3-bedroom. We're not done with conservation. I wasn't aware of that. So that would be very difficult to try and wrap this up without having conservation, particularly in that in my opinion, in all the 40Bs that I've done, we always try and get conservation sorted out. But here we have wetlands running through the middle of the site. We have wetlands around the site. We have vernal pools. Here, I think it's particularly important to get that sorted out. So we, as the zoning board, you guys have something to go with. You have a wetland line to actually work with and say, is the project, located in the best places? Are these buildings in the right places? Things like that. So the applicant has submitted a letter in writing stating that and he's closing the hearing on November 10th.
That's correct.
I have reached out to applicants' counsel twice, both counsel. I have not had the courtesy of a reply from either one. I had a clarifying question on that. And so again, I'm kind of in the same, I'm also a little bit confused, and I'm not sure which direction this is going in because, I'm not getting answers to questions that are being sent.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Hale.
I would like to remind the board that at a previous hearing, you were asked if there would be further work sessions, and your answer was no. So to blame us at this point for miscommunication is inappropriate. And we do intend to wrap up the hearings on the 10th. I'd be glad to have our team meet with Sean and Rob before that, but that is what I wrote, and that's what I meant.
Okay, understand that. Okay, anything else from anybody? And what we're going to do is we're going to have another follow-up hearing to this on Thursday, where the neighbors are going to have a chance to comment. And the idea of that is we're just trying to take this in sections where it's manageable. So, and they'll be basing their comments on what they've heard tonight and the plans that they've seen and anything that they have questions on that. So that being said, let's see. Ashley, do you have anything for us?
I think continuing this matter would be great. And I just want to say, I've always been happy to facilitate any conversation or dialogue. We did have a few work sessions, and part of the agreement of those work sessions was that no plans be formally submitted to the ZBA until the ZBA got to hear from the peer reviewers on those recommendations, because it's this board that should be directing where the project should go and not the peer reviewers. And plans, in fact, were submitted ahead of this board getting that testimony. So at that point, the board decided that these things should happen in a public hearing session. So I just want to make that clear that we did work sessions and we did collaborate. And my understanding is that town departments have responded to applicants' requests for comments. So that's all I have to say on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think the process is misunderstood. We're responsible for our plan, and the board reviews it. And we never agreed at a work session not to go ahead and modify the plans. That would be highly unusual and not something that I would ever even contemplate.
I will
Okay.
send you the recording.
Okay, that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue this hearing until Thursday night, and that is that is November 5th. It will be another Zoom meeting, and let's see, and yes, so we will, could I have anybody else have any questions or comments? Ashley, we'll do it as a Zoom meeting that'll be set up, and the neighbors, the purpose of that meeting is for the neighbor comments, because I think they've been listening in tonight, but they have not been participating. Okay. Very good. Could I have a motion to continue this until Thursday, November 5th at 7 p.m.?
So moved.
Moved by Suzanne,
Second by
second by Jane. Okay, any further discussion on continuing until Thursday? Okay, this is a roll call vote to continue until Thursday. Bob Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Jane Coffey,
aye.
Suzanne Murphy,
Murphy, aye.
Drew Delaney,
Aye.
Dave Anderson.
Aye.
I'm John Lee, aye. Okay, so this is continued until Thursday, November 5th at 7 p.m. We look forward to seeing people then. Okay. Very good. Let's see, Amy, that is Amy Questle. anything else for us before we all start checking out?
No, I did inform Ashley. Unfortunately, I am not available on Thursday night. I have a town meeting that I'm covering, but I think you'll just be listening to comments. So anything that comes out of that, Ashley will relay to me. But I apologize for the scheduling change.
That's good. Okay.
John, just one question too. Should we be penciling in the 10th or just as a procedural matter, follow-up? I guess if the applicant had mentioned that the 10th might be the drop dead date, so I don't know.
I'm not sure where he's coming up with this. I guess Amy, can he have us close the hearing on the 10th?
So the hearing for tonight was obviously was continued. There was a motion made. So so in general, not this project, but any other any 40B project, if the applicant requests that the hearing be closed, the hearing should be closed.
Right.
And we will base our decision on the testimony in the record. And so therefore, for an applicant to, close before questions are answered is not beneficial to anyone, in my opinion. But that's in speaking in general terms, not in terms of this project, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, okay. I think we'll be having conversations with council on this. So.
Correct. And the other thing, Mr. Chairman, to remember is also the regulations provide that once the hearing is closed, the Zoning Board of Appeals has 40 days to issue a decision.
Right, and my concern is that even if whatever we have for time, but if we do not have further testimony and input and solutions to some of these issues that have been brought up, it's going to be hard to have a good decision. So
That's why I said I was concerned about a decision with 200 conditions associated with it, because that's what ends up happening.
So we
I mean, they won't even be through conservation by then.
We're speaking in general terms here, so.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
generally, they probably won't be through conservation yet.
Okay, so that's where we are, and we still got people on. There's still 29 participants out there, so the neighbors are still hearing this and listening. So, okay, so let's see. Ashley, we did get. I'm sorry, Amy, we did get minutes from our last meeting. I did have a chance to review those. I don't know if other people had a chance to review the minutes from the previous meeting. If you did, does somebody want to make a motion about approving those, or are there any? Make a motion, then we can discuss it.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of is it October 28th.
Okay. Motion made by Bob. Could I have a second?
Second.
Second by Suzanne. Any further discussion? Any corrections or anything to change on those minutes?
That looked great to me.
Okay, good. Okay, roll call vote for approving the minutes. All those in favor, Bob Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Jane Coffey,
Aye.
Suzanne Murphy,
Murphy, aye.
Dave Anderson,
Aye.
Drew Delaney.
Aye.
Okay, those are approved. Okay, Ashley, do you have anything for us?
No, thank you.
Okay, Amy, anything else?
As in me?
Yes, you, Amy, yes.
No.
Very good. I will see everybody on Thursday night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys later.
Oh, did you motion to adjourn?
Oh,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Sorry.
Second.
second, made by Suzanne, second by Jane.
Yeah.
Roll call vote to adjourn. Sorry about that. Bob Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Jane Coffey,
Aye.
Suzanne, Suzanne Murphy,
Oh, I thought you said Dan. I'm like, who's Dan? Murphy, aye.
Drew Delaney,
Aye.
Dave Anderson,
Aye.
John Lee, aye. Okay, motion to adjourn. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Aye.
Good night.